Hello and welcome to another video by Econo Insight. This video is part of the playlist of measuring inflation, and this video will cover about the CPI, or otherwise known as the Consumer Price Index. The CPI is a very popular tool, very popular to measure inflation. I'm sure you might have heard it or you don't know what it really means. This video will cover that. So first, it is measured in the US at least by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or otherwise known as the BLS. Possibly in other countries, most likely the CPI is measured by the Statistical Bureau of that certain country. In the US, it is the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics. So, CPI is tasked of measuring inflation, but now let's refresh for a bit about what inflation really is. It's simple. Inflation is defined as a general increase in price levels. Very important to know this definition so you really know. It's simple, but you know it. On point. Inflation is simply the general increase in price levels. So now, how do we calculate the CPI? Realistically, if the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates it, it's a very complex process, but we just want to get an idea of how it is calculated, just a brief overview. So, first, imagine there are so many goods and services in the economy presented by these little circles here. So, let's say there are thousands of circles. So, what the statisticians do is that they combine all the prices of these goods and services and they turn it into a single index to measure the overall level of prices. They compile it, make an index, and that is the overall level of prices. But remember here, the thousands of prices of goods and services in the CPI is related to the consumer. What do I mean by this? So the thousands of goods and services is the one that is purchased by a typical consumer. So we are looking only from the perspective of consumers. So we are looking at the goods and services purchased by consumers. It does not include, for example, goods and services purchased by firms or governments. It does not include that. So it just wants to include consumers, from the point of consumers. Hence the name CPI, Consumer Price Index. Remember that. So again, thousands of prices are compiled, turned into a single index, and that index is the CPI. But note, in the CPI, each component of each good and services is given a designated weight. A key aspect of the CPI is that each component of the goods and services is given a designated weight, or we can call it a fixed weight. So maybe some goods have a greater weight because maybe it's more important, people consume that more, so it has high relative importance. Maybe other goods has less weight, so maybe it has less importance. So that's the key point. Each goods and services has a designated weight. So now let's consider a hypothetical economy. And in that economy, the economy, let's say, is only producing good A. Good A could be anything. But let's just put it as good A. So how to calculate the CPI here? Mathematically, the CPI is equivalent to the current price. Notice the current price of good A. I'm just going to put A here. The current quantity of good A. I'm going to put A. Only A. This is over. Divided by the base year price of good A, multiplied by the current quantity of good A. So notice here the terminology base year. It's best to watch the video previously about GDP deflators, about base years, but If you do not watch that, I'm just gonna give you a little insight. Base year is a price from a certain year. So we are looking at the current price relative to the price at that year. So we're using like in here like a constant set of price. We wanna see how different is the current price and the base year, the price in the base year. If you wanna have more detail about what base year is, visit the video about the GDP deflator and the real GDP and the nominal GDP. That will enlighten you. But now back to the CPI. So this is the mathematical way of calculating the CPI. The current price of price A times current quantity of price A over the base price of A times the current quantity of good A. So we can see that this equation here, again, very important, I will repeat this again, tells us the current prices relative to the base here. So that's what we're looking for. The price, the change in price, the difference in price. So maybe some of you might ask, what is the difference between CPI and GDP deflator? They look the same. At first when I studied it also, I thought, hey, this looks similar. Well, it is. They are similar, but they have certain differences. So first, the CPI is what you call, fancy term coming out, a last pairs index. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And the GDP deflator is what we call a Pache index. What is the last pairs index? It's basically that each component of the goods and services has a fixed weight, an assigned weight, call it whatever you want, an assigned weight, a fixed weight, a designated weight, while a Pache index has changing weights. Right? Because if you remember the video about GDP deflators is that you divide the nominal GDP and the real GDP, right? So that's the GDP. So that is the changing weight. You don't assign a designated weight for a single good and services. You see the GDP as a whole. Next is that the CPI includes imported goods, also because it's the goods and services purchased by a typical consumer. So, and note here is about the consumer point of view, while GDP deflator, as it's the GDP, it has something to do with the GDP. It just sees the goods and services which are domestically produced. And the last difference is, there are actually other differences, but these are the main differences. And it is the basket of goods purchased by a typical consumer. This is a highlight of the CPI, typical consumer, while the GDP deflator is all goods and services on the economy. Does not matter. Consumer, government, who cares? GDP deflator gets them all. While CPI is only consumer perspective of the consumer. So we know that we know what a Pache index is, last pairs index, very important to know what these are in economics. And let's see, that we know that the CPI has done us good by measuring inflation, but what is the main weakness of CPI? Economists notice is that CPI overstates inflation. So I'm just gonna say it here, overstates inflation. Maybe some of you might ask, why? Why does the CPI overstate inflation? It's because it ignores the effect of substitution. What is substitution in this case? It's that, imagine when you're measuring a CPI, a certain basket of goods and services purchased by a typical consumer is created. So, hey, these are the, things that the consumer would like to buy. And let's say the prices increase. The CPI would just record that, But in reality, if you think about it, if prices increase then for that good, then probably consumers will substitute. They will purchase something else because that price has gone up. They will purchase something else. They will substitute that. And if you think about it further, that is substitution already, right? You are not following what the consumer is not following what is in the basket of goods and services. It's not determined by the CPI. They're changing it. They're substituting it. So when they're substituting it, they may get cheaper prices. So in that case, because the CPI does not account for substitution, it just accounts about what is in the basket, what is in the predetermined basket with the predetermined weights. Hence, it overstates inflation. So that is the main problem with the CPI. It overstates inflation. But hey, if you think about it, it's still reliable because the CPI, the GDP deflator, they move together. So maybe the CPI is normally always higher than the GDP deflator because it overstates inflation. But the point is, it's that they move together. So that's very important. They move together. So, but in this case, CPI overstates inflation. So I hope this video helps, and thank you for watching.